Gossip columns painted Dominic Romano as a monster who only bedded hollow, flawless supermodels. Nobody knew the terrifying head of the Chicago syndicate was quietly obsessed with Beatrice, a clumsy, unapologetically fat nanny who spilled hot coffee on his $3,000 suit and accidentally stole his frozen heart. Beatrice Gallagher stood outside the towering wrought-iron gates of the Highland Park estate, clutching her battered leather portfolio against her chest like a shield. She was 20 minutes early for her interview, yet somehow she already felt like she was entirely out of time and thoroughly out of place. Beatrice was a fat woman. She possessed a soft, heavy figure that took up space in a world that constantly demanded women shrink themselves. Her broad hips, thick thighs, and full belly were usually hidden beneath practical oversized cardigans, but today she wore a tailored navy dress that hugged her generous curves a little too closely. Sweat beaded on her forehead, dampening her dark curls. At 250 pounds, climbing the steep winding driveway of the Romano estate in the sweltering July heat was a miserable endeavor. When the massive oak front doors finally opened, Beatrice was met with an interior so pristine and intimidating it looked like a modern art museum. High ceilings, immaculate white marble floors, and sharp, angular furniture dominated the grand foyer. "Take off your shoes." A sharp, condescending voice echoed through the hall. Beatrice blinked, adjusting her glasses. Descending the grand staircase was Cassandra Dupont, a woman who looked like she subsisted entirely on black coffee cigarettes and pure spite. Cassandra was currently gracing the cover of 3 international fashion magazines. She was a supermodel, a frequent fixture on Dominic Romano's arm at high society galas, and her impossibly long, stick-thin legs carried her down the steps with predatory grace. "Mr. Romano does not tolerate dirt on the Italian marble," Cassandra sneered, looking Beatrice up and down with barely concealed disgust. Her eyes lingered cruelly on Beatrice's waistline. "Though I suppose he didn't expect the agency to send a bakery delivery truck instead of a nanny." Beatrice's cheeks flushed a hot, humiliating crimson, but she bit her tongue. She desperately needed this job. Leaning down to unbuckle her modest heels, her hand slipped. The heavy leather portfolio plummeted from her grasp, bursting open upon impact. Papers, brightly colored crayons, a half-eaten granola bar, and a thermos of iced coffee cascaded across the flawless white marble. The thermos hit the floor with a terrifying crack, sending a dark, sticky puddle of coffee spreading rapidly toward the center of the room. "Oh my God!" Beatrice gasped, dropping to her hands and knees, her large, soft frame scrambling desperately to clean up the mess. "I am so sorry. I'm so clumsy. I have napkins in here somewhere. What is going on here?" The voice was low resonant and possessed the kind of dangerous authority that made the air in the room turn instantly frigid. Beatrice froze on her hands and knees. She looked up slowly. Standing in the doorway of a massive study was Dominic Romano. He was undeniably terrifying, radiating a lethal quiet power. Dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that likely cost more than Beatrice's entire college tuition, Dominic had sharp, aristocratic features, dark, calculating eyes, and a jawline that looked like it could cut glass. As the head of the most feared mafia syndicate in the Midwest, Dominic was accustomed to total perfection and absolute obedience. Cassandra instantly transformed her cruel sneer, melting into a pouty, seductive smile as she glided toward him. "Dominic, darling, the agency sent this woman. She just destroyed your foyer. I'll have security throw her out immediately." Dominic did not look at Cassandra. His dark eyes were fixed entirely on Beatrice, who was still kneeling in a puddle of iced coffee, her face burning with shame. He stepped forward. Cassandra reached out to touch his arm, but he completely ignored her, stepping past the supermodel, as if she were nothing more than a piece of irritating furniture. He stopped right in front of Beatrice. Up close, he smelled of expensive cedar fine tobacco and danger. "Get up," he commanded, though his voice lacked the expected fury. Beatrice scrambled to her feet, wiping her sticky hands awkwardly on her dress. "Mr. Romano, I am so incredibly sorry. My hands were sweaty, and the bag is heavy, and I trip over my own shadow on the best of days. I'll pay for the cleaning, please." Dominic studied her. He was surrounded daily by women like Cassandra, manufactured, starved, sharp-edged women who looked beautiful in photographs, but felt entirely empty in person. They were calculated, ambitious, and hollow. Beatrice was none of those things. She was flushed, embarrassed, soft, and unashamedly real. Her large, expressive brown eyes were filled with a genuine, frantic kindness. Before Dominic could respond, a small shadow darted out from behind his legs. It was Leo. The 5-year-old boy had not spoken a single word since a rival syndicate's car bomb had taken his mother's life 2 years ago. He was a ghost in his own home, staring blankly at the world, refusing to eat, refusing to play. Leo looked down at the mess on the floor. He spotted one of the brightly colored crayons that had rolled away from the puddle. He tentatively picked it up. Beatrice, forgetting her fear of the Mafia Boss for a fraction of a second, smiled softly at the boy. "That's my favorite color," she whispered gently, her voice warm and melodic. "Macaroni and cheese orange. It makes the best suns when you draw the sky." Leo looked up at her. He looked at her soft, round face, then at the bright orange crayon. Slowly, incredibly, the corners of the little boy's mouth twitched upward. It was a tiny, fragile smile, but it was the first time he had shown any emotion in 24 months. Dominic's breath hitched in his chest. His heart, which had been frozen solid by years of bloodshed and betrayal, gave a violent, unexpected lurch. He stared at the clumsy, curvy woman who had just ruined his floor and inadvertently brought his son back to life. "Cassandra," Dominic said, his voice deadly quiet, never taking his eyes off Beatrice. "Yes, Dominic." Cassandra purred, stepping closer. "Pack your bags. Leave my house. Now." Cassandra gasped, her perfectly manicured hands flying to her mouth. "What, Dominic, you can't be serious because of this fat cow." Dominic turned his head just an inch. The look in his eyes was so profoundly lethal that Cassandra physically recoiled. "If you ever speak about my son's new nanny like that again," Dominic whispered, "I will ensure you never walk a runway again. Get out." Cassandra fled her heels, clicking frantically against the marble. Dominic turned back to Beatrice, who was staring at him in utter shock. He pulled a pristine silk handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her. "You have the job, Miss Gallagher. The pay is 10,000 a week. Do not make me regret this." 3 weeks passed, and the stifling atmosphere of the Romano estate fundamentally shifted. Beatrice was a chaotic, beautiful disruption to Dominic's deeply ordered, violent life. She possessed zero grace. In her first week alone, she managed to accidentally set off the mansion's security alarm while trying to toast a bagel, bumped into a 200-year-old suit of armor in the hallway, causing it to collapse with a deafening crash, and somehow managed to spill flour all over Dominic's custom Italian leather shoes while baking cookies with Leo. And yet Dominic found himself entirely mesmerized. He had spent his life dealing with men who lied to his face and women who manipulated him for his wealth and power. Beatrice was entirely transparent. She wore her emotions on her sleeve, and she poured her soul into caring for his son. Under her guidance, Leo had begun to thrive. The little boy was eating again, laughing at Beatrice's terrible clumsy antics and clinging to her soft plush waist whenever he felt scared. Dominic, to his own profound shock, found himself rushing through interrogations and syndicate meetings just so he could return home early. He would sit in the shadows of his study, watching the security feeds, not to look for assassins, but to watch Beatrice in the kitchen. He watched the way she hummed to herself while she cooked. He watched the way her thick thighs pressed against the kitchen island as she reached for a high shelf. He was captivated by the sheer softness of her. He wanted to bury his hands in her curves to protect her from the cruel world that had clearly made her so insecure about her size. But the world outside the mansion's iron gates was incredibly cruel and immensely dangerous. Arthur Pendleton, the ruthless head of the rival Irish syndicate on the south side, had been losing territory to Dominic for months. Pendleton was growing desperate, and desperate men made reckless, bloody decisions. Word had reached the criminal underworld that the great Dominic Romano had a new weakness, a soft, fat nanny who lived in his house and cared for his son. On a stormy Tuesday night, the mansion was unusually quiet. Dominic was locked in his basement command center, aggressively renegotiating shipping routes with 2 port commissioners. He had ordered his elite guards to patrol the perimeter, assuming the heavy rain would deter any immediate threats. Upstairs, Beatrice was awake. Her anxiety often kept her up at night, an old habit born from a lifetime of feeling like she was never quite good enough. Her stomach gave a soft rumble. Deciding that a midnight snack was the only cure for insomnia, she wrapped herself in her oversized, fluffy pink bathrobe and padded barefoot down the grand staircase toward the massive industrial kitchen. She opened the massive stainless steel refrigerator, the cool light washing over her face. She pulled out a large plate of leftover lasagna, a jar of premium mayonnaise, and half a loaf of crusty Italian bread. As she turned around, her elbow caught the edge of the milk carton, sending it tumbling to the floor. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Beatrice muttered, watching the white liquid splash across the dark tile. Clumsy idiot. She set her food on the marble island and reached for a roll of paper towels. She didn't hear the back door of the kitchen click open. She didn't hear the soft, calculated footsteps of the man dressed entirely in black tactical gear, stepping over the threshold. Pendleton's top assassin, a ghost of a man known only as the Viper, had slipped past the exterior guards and picked the biometric lock on the kitchen entrance. His orders were simple: take the nanny hostage, force Dominic to surrender his territory, and burn the house down. The Viper drew a suppressed pistol, raising it slowly as he crept up behind the large woman in the pink bathrobe. He prepared to grab her from behind. Beatrice, having grabbed a handful of paper towels, spun around abruptly to clean the spilled milk. As she pivoted, her bare foot landed squarely in the center of the slick, milky puddle. With a yelp of surprise, Beatrice's feet completely flew out from under her. All 250 pounds of her body went airborne for a fraction of a second, tumbling backward with the unstoppable momentum of a runaway freight train. The Viper, who was less than 2 feet behind her, never even had a chance to react. Beatrice crashed squarely into the assassin. Her substantial weight slammed into his chest, completely crushing his breath from his lungs. The sheer, unexpected force of the collision threw the highly trained killer backward. His boots scrambled for traction, but he was violently propelled across the kitchen. The back of his skull connected with the sharp, unforgiving edge of the solid granite countertop with a sickening crack. The assassin crumpled to the floor, completely unconscious, his suppressed pistol clattering uselessly under the stove. Beatrice landed hard on her bottom, groaning in pain, surrounded by spilled milk and a shattered jar of mayonnaise that had tumbled off the counter in the chaos. "Ouch," she whimpered, rubbing her hip. Seriously, Beatrice again." It was only then that she noticed the man dressed like a ninja, lying totally motionless beside the kitchen island. She blinked her brain, struggling to process the scene. Why was there a man in a ski mask in the kitchen? And why was he bleeding onto Mr. Romano's expensive tiles? Before she could scream, the kitchen doors burst open. Dominic stormed in an automatic rifle gripped tightly in his hands, his face a mask of absolute terrifying fury. He had been alerted by the biometric door alarm and had sprinted up 2 flights of stairs expecting a bloodbath. Instead, he found the Midwest's most lethal hitman completely knocked out cold on the floor, and his clumsy, beautiful Nanny sitting in a puddle of milk covered in mayonnaise, looking profoundly apologetic. Dominic lowered his weapon, staring at the scene in absolute disbelief. He looked at the unconscious assassin, then down at Beatrice. "Mr. Romano." Beatrice stammered, tears of embarrassment prickling her eyes. "I am so sorry. I dropped the milk and I slipped, and I think I fell on your—" "Ninja, please don't fire me. I'll clean the floors, I promise." Dominic let out a sound that was half gasp, half laugh. It was the first time he had laughed in years. He placed his rifle on the counter and walked slowly toward her, ignoring the mess entirely. He knelt down in the milk and mayonnaise, ruining his expensive trousers, and gently took Beatrice's trembling, sticky hands in his own. "You didn't just fall on him, Beatrice." Dominic murmured, his dark eyes burning with an intense, fierce emotion that made Beatrice's heart hammer wildly in her chest. "You just took out Arthur Pendleton's best killer. You saved your own life." I did," she whispered, looking at the large, intimidating Mafia Boss who was currently kneeling in a puddle just to be at eye level with her. "Yes," Dominic said softly, his thumb gently wiping a smear of mayonnaise from her cheek. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, possessive rumble. "And I am never ever letting you leave this house." Morning light filtered through the thick, velvet curtains of the Romano estate, casting long, dramatic shadows across the polished marble floors. Chaos from the previous night had been entirely scrubbed away by Dominic's private, highly efficient cleanup crew. Nobody outside these heavily guarded walls would ever know a lethal assassin had been subdued by a combination of spilled dairy, shattered mayonnaise, and Beatrice's spectacular, unpredictable clumsiness. Dominic sat quietly at the head of the massive mahogany dining table, slowly sipping his black espresso. His dark, calculating eyes remained firmly fixed on the swinging kitchen doors. Anticipation curled tightly in his broad chest. Moments later, those wooden doors swung open. Beatrice stumbled into the dining room, carrying a massive silver tray loaded with fluffy buttermilk pancakes, perfectly crispy bacon, and a precarious, wobbling tower of scrambled eggs. Her soft, round face was flushed with exertion and lingering embarrassment. Oversized grey sweatpants and a baggy, faded band t-shirt completely swallowed her magnificent curves. Hiding her body beneath layers of shapeless fabric was a clear sign of her deeply rooted insecurities. "Careful," Dominic warned softly, rising from his heavy leather chair to meet her halfway across the room. Taking the heavy silver tray from her trembling hands, his warm fingers brushed deliberately against hers. Electric heat shot rapidly up Beatrice's arm, making her gasp softly in surprise. Blushing furiously, Beatrice ducked her head, staring intently at the floor. "Thank you, Mr. Romano. Leo is still fast asleep upstairs, but I figured you might be incredibly hungry after everything that happened." "Dominic," he corrected smoothly, placing the mountain of food safely on the table. "My name is Dominic Beatrice. Calling me Mr. Romano feels entirely wrong, especially after you literally saved my life." Looking down at her own plush, slipper-clad feet, Beatrice nervously twisted the worn hem of her cotton shirt. I really didn't do anything heroic, Dominic. Slipping on a puddle of milk and crushing a man isn't exactly a highly tactical combat move. Anyone could have done it. Stepping significantly closer, Dominic gently tipped her soft chin up with his calloused index finger. None of my highly trained, heavily armed guards stopped that man from entering my home. You did. Stop diminishing your own brilliant light, Beatrice. Tears pricked her large brown eyes. Men like Dominic Romano did not look at women like her with such raw, unmasked, and intense admiration. High society corporate events and criminal underworld galas were exclusively populated by razor-thin, perfectly sculpted women who seemingly survived on kale leaves and expensive vodka. Beatrice was soft, thick, and undeniably heavy. Society had spent her entire 30 years telling her she took up entirely too much space. Yet Dominic's intense predatory gaze made her feel exactly right. Later that afternoon, the sweltering Chicago heat became absolutely unbearable. Deciding to take advantage of the estate's private indoor pool, Beatrice slipped into a modest black one-piece swimsuit. Wrapping a large towel tightly around her heavy hips, she crept down the quiet corridors, praying fervently that no one would see her thighs jiggling. Slipping silently into the cool, refreshing water, Beatrice finally let out a long sigh of absolute relief. Cool water supported her generous weight, making her feel beautifully weightless and completely free. Unbeknownst to her, Dominic stood silently in the shadowed doorway, watching the water lap gently against her full breasts and smooth, thick thighs. His breath caught painfully in his throat. Cassandra's sharp, bony angles suddenly seemed entirely repulsive compared to the lush, inviting softness of the wonderful woman swimming before him. Removing his tailored suit jacket, Dominic walked slowly to the edge of the pool. Hearing his steady approach, Beatrice gasped loudly, furiously, treading water to hide her submerged body from his intense gaze. "Dominic, I thought you were in a meeting," Beatrice stammered, her round face turning a vibrant shade of crimson. "My meeting concluded early," Dominic replied, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Crouching down gracefully at the edge of the tiled pool, he met her panicked gaze. "You look incredibly beautiful in the water, Beatrice. Stop trying to hide yourself from me." "I'm too big," Beatrice whispered sadly, a rogue tear slipping down her wet cheek. "I don't belong in a place like this, surrounded by endless perfection." Reaching out, Dominic firmly gripped her wet, slippery shoulder. "Perfection is a miserable, lonely illusion. You are profoundly real, Beatrice. Your body is a sanctuary. I want you exactly as you are." Meanwhile, deep within a grimy, abandoned shipping warehouse on the gritty south side, Arthur Pendleton was practically vibrating with homicidal rage. Smashing a heavy crystal whiskey decanter brutally against a solid brick wall, the Irish syndicate boss roared in utter frustration. His very best killer, the Viper, was currently rotting away in Dominic Romano's underground interrogation cells. How does a legendary hitman get completely neutralized by a fat nanny? Arthur bellowed, turning rapidly to face his trembling, heavily armed lieutenants. This is a profound, unforgivable humiliation. Stepping quietly out from the darkest corners of the warehouse, a familiar, terrifyingly thin figure smirked viciously. Cassandra DuPont had enthusiastically traded her designer silk gowns for a sleek black leather trench coat. Her cold eyes practically burned with vindictive, toxic malice. "Romano's new little pet is clumsy and pathetic, Arthur," Cassandra purred, walking confidently toward the furious mob boss. "Dominic actually fired me for that fat, disgusting cow. Dominic arrogantly thinks she is safe behind his high walls. However, I intimately know the master security codes to the estate's private, heavily wooded gardens. Arthur's fiery anger slowly morphed into a wicked, highly calculating grin. "Tell me absolutely everything, Cassandra. We are going to burn his beautiful empire completely to the ground, starting directly with the nanny." Friday evening suddenly arrived with a suffocating, miserable humidity that stubbornly clung to the towering Chicago skyline. Inside the heavily fortified Romano estate, Beatrice was blissfully, beautifully unaware of the impending lethal danger creeping toward her. Deciding to bake a massive 3-tier chocolate cake to properly celebrate little Leo's successful week of speaking his very first full sentences, she joyfully hummed a cheerful, upbeat pop song. White baking flour dusted her rosy, plump cheeks. Rich, dark chocolate frosting stained her oversized yellow apron. Her thick, lovely hips bumped playfully against the marble counter to the infectious rhythm of the music. Outside the mansion, utter chaos erupted without a single warning. Silenced high-caliber gunshots shattered the quiet, peaceful night. Cassandra's stolen, highly classified security codes had successfully allowed Arthur Pendleton's heavily armed Ruthless crew to silently bypass the outer perimeter, completely swarming the manicured gardens. Dominic was aggressively reviewing financial documents in his study when the primary blaring alarms deafened the entire floor. Grabbing 2 customized, fully loaded Glock 19 pistols from his locked desk drawer, pure, unadulterated adrenaline rapidly surged through his veins. High-definition security monitors boldly displayed heavily armed intruders violently breaching the East Wing. One specific, horrifying camera feed made his blood run completely cold. Cassandra and Arthur were marching directly, purposely toward the kitchen. "Beatrice!" Dominic growled violently, sprinting out of the study with lethal, terrifying purpose. Back in the massive kitchen, Beatrice dropped her frosting-covered spatula in pure shock. Sturdy glass shattered violently as the massive, reinforced French doors leading to the patio were brutally kicked inward. Arthur Pendleton boldly strode into the room, expertly leveling a deadly sawed-off shotgun directly at her chest. Cassandra followed closely behind, cruelly sneering at the terrified, trembling Nanny. "Well, well, well." Arthur chuckled darkly, mockingly, eyeing Beatrice's soft, terrified form. This large woman must be Romano's infamous secret weapon. Frankly, my dear, I expected someone a bit more physically intimidating. Cassandra laughed, the sound sharp and exceptionally cruel. "I clearly told you, Arthur. Dominic foolishly traded a flawless diamond for a heavily frosted, pathetic donut. Now aggressively grab her. We will happily make Dominic watch us completely break his new favorite toy." Suffocating panic aggressively seized Beatrice's chest. Backing away slowly, her large, soft frame heavily collided with the massive rolling island cart, firmly positioned in the exact center of the kitchen. Arthur confidently lunged forward, intending to viciously grab her thick, dark hair. Survival instincts and sheer desperation suddenly took completely over. Shoving the heavy industrial rolling cart with all her substantial panicked might, Beatrice utilized every single ounce of her 250-pound strength. Sturdy metallic wheels squeaked loudly. Solid oak and granite barreled forcefully forward, smashing brutally and precisely into Arthur's kneecaps. Howling in blinding, excruciating agony, the notorious mob boss instantly dropped his loaded shotgun, collapsing and desperately clutching his shattered, broken legs. Cassandra shrieked in absolute outrage, rapidly pulling a small silver pistol from her expensive coat pocket. Aiming wildly at Beatrice, the furious supermodel's bony hands visibly shook with uncontrollable rage. "Die, you miserable fat cow!" Cassandra screamed at the top of her lungs. Before the trigger could be successfully pulled, a deafening, thunderous roar loudly echoed through the grand kitchen. Dominic Romano aggressively stepped through the shattered, broken doorway, looking exactly like a vengeful, terrifying god of war. 2 incredibly precise shots from his Glocks instantly disarmed Cassandra and permanently lethally neutralized Arthur's 2 remaining advancing guards. Dropping her small weapon immediately, Cassandra heavily fell to her sharp knees, hysterically sobbing in absolute profound terror. Ignoring the crying supermodel completely, Dominic frantically rushed to Beatrice, pulling her plush, flower-covered, beautiful body tightly into his broad chest. He deeply buried his face in her sweet-smelling dark curls. His rapidly beating heart pounded wildly against her soft, generous curves. "Are you hurt?" Dominic frantically demanded, his normally cold voice thick with uncharacteristic raw panic. His large, warm hands rapidly mapped every single inch of her broad shoulders and thick waist, thoroughly checking for any hidden injuries. "Only my fragile pride," Beatrice choked out softly, desperately wrapping her arms tightly around his broad, incredibly muscular back. "I completely ruined the chocolate cake for Leo." Looking down at the beautiful, incredibly brave, trembling woman securely held in his arms, Dominic slowly let out a ragged, emotional breath. "Forget the silly cake, Beatrice. I have miserably spent my entire violent life constantly surrounded by hollow people and completely empty promises. You beautifully brought light, genuine warmth and wonderful chaos into my incredibly dark, dangerous world. I deeply love your stunning softness. I passionately love your profound kindness. I genuinely love every single beautiful, perfect pound of you." Salty tears quickly spilled down Beatrice's rosy cheeks, messily mixing with the white flour on her face. For the very first time in her entire challenging life, she genuinely didn't feel too big or entirely out of place. Clinging tightly to the ruthless, powerful Mafia Boss, who had violently conquered the entire city just to fiercely protect her, she beautifully felt exactly the perfect size. Dominic lovingly leaned down, passionately, capturing her sweet lips in a deep, utterly consuming kiss. Violent chaos violently swirled all around them, but standing safely in the center of the kitchen, surrounded completely by broken glass and spilled chocolate frosting, 2 vastly different souls had finally found perfect, enduring peace.